Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of 0 to 60. Now on this episode we're going to be going through the installation options of an Android unit into an E53 BMW. This will be relevant to both E53, E46 and E39 Beamers. They've all got a very similar audio setup from the factory, and it's all quite complicated if you haven't gone through it before, so hopefully we'll try and crush a few questions. Now we have actually done an install on David's E39, but because of all the different stereo options, we didn't really get into the technical side of it, and I want to get into that a little bit more in this video, so hopefully it'll help you understand it to a T so you're ready to tackle an installation yourself. Now when it comes to the unit, I've gone for an xtrons unit. Now I actually used to have an E53, and it was the first vehicle that we ever put Androids into. And I actually ended up with 3 different Androids in that car. I learned a lot about getting the cheap ones, and I ended up with an xtrons. Xtrons, they're all Chinese made, but xtrons is one of the few companies that's got a decent website. I mean, there's xtrons, Chicane, I can't think of any other ones, but there's a few companies that are trying to stand out from all the Chinese sellers, and I just like xtrons. I also ended up with an xtrons unit in my other car, and it worked so much better than the other ones, which is why I try and get them when we're looking to do this sort of thing. I bought this one from eBay Australia. It was sold through Xtrons Australia, which I think is just a fake company to miss paying tax when they import the products. It's pretty dodgy, but I think a lot of Chinese companies do it. It is their top of the range unit, so it is the most expensive unit you can currently buy for an E53 or an E39. It is the version, you'll see it in a second, it has got the face on it which really suits the E53 dashboard. I think if I had an E39 or an E46 I would get a different style, and this is the first time I'm opening it up, so we'll see what goodies we've got inside. Now this newer unit, I could see the pictures on the listing, they've shrunk the size of it down massively. They have, I mean it's just like a tablet now. That's literally it. It sits on the dashboard that way up. Something I liked about the new generations, it has got like a proper capacitive touch screen and also curved edges, so it just looks a little bit nicer and it'll feel a bit nicer to the touch when you're using it. Got a screen protector on it at the moment, but we'll leave it there. And yeah, that's it. I mean, these things, they are an Android. They do have an amplifier in them, but man, yeah, that's it. I'm a bit shocked. Yeah, it's got its main harness connector. It's got a few extra connectors for RCA leads, video input, GPS, that sort of stuff. It's got 4 USB ports on the back. Let's have a look through everything that we've got in here. GPS antennas, USB adapters or extension cables, a microphone, which is going to be handy because we will be putting CarPlay onto this. Cool. That's a GPS antenna. That's the Wi-Fi antenna. So we've got all that there. Now in this bag here, this is something that annoys me with most of the Chinese Android sellers. They never supply this cable. And I'll explain further once we start looking into the vehicle why, but I feel like 9 out of 10 stereos that get installed need this cable. So because the BM53 module is in the boot, and what you actually see in the dashboard of a X5, E46, E39 is literally just a screen, this is what you need to connect the new Android unit into the car's factory harness in the boot. And we'll go and have a look at that shortly, and I'm going to have a question for you. So let me try and explain all the different stereo options in these generation of vehicles. All right, let's have a look in here. Now, I've been trying to, for the last couple of minutes, run through my mind different ways to explain what the setup is with these stereos, because the way that BMW did their stereos in the E39, E46 and E53 generation was quite different to what most cars were. Like if you've ever fitted an aftermarket stereo to an older vehicle, you just replace your single or doubled in unit in the dashboard and then everything works. If you want to run an amp in the back, you can run some RCAs there, but most of your connections are in the dashboard and it's super easy to install. In these generation of vehicles, BMW in their brilliance, and to be fair, they're quite good setups, they ran components for the infotainment all throughout the vehicle. I'm trying to work out the best way to explain the different options. I guess what you need to work out is what version your car currently has. Not what version, but what setup it has, because you can, BMW sort of mixed and matched options with these stereos. But basically, off the top of my head, you can have 3 different versions of in-dash unit here. I normally refer to them as a screen because in Australia, most of the E53s are just fitted with this style of screen, and it is legit just a screen. There is the older version screen, which has a 4x3 screen, and then all the buttons on this side. It was just a smaller display, and I think there was less colors than this display. However, you could still have TV in that. And then there's another version where it looks a bit more like an old school stereo, and I'll try and put up pictures of each one so it sort of makes sense. So once you've worked out what type of head unit you've got, you then need to work out if your car has an amplifier. Now, all of the versions that have screens, TV screens, all of the cars that were equipped to do navigation, they have amplifiers. Well, to my knowledge, I'm sure there'll be something weird that might catch me out, but pretty much all of the E53s with a decent infotainment setup from the factory had an amplifier in the boot. Now, BMW in their wisdom, they complicated the amplifiers as well. But I just want to touch on the vehicles that don't have an amplifier. So if you've got the very basic display, it's not even a display, it just looks like an old school radio that displays a couple of tracks and basic information. If you've got that version, have a quick look in the back. If you don't have an amplifier, you're good to just plug and play the Android into the dashboard up here. You don't need that 6-meter cable that I mentioned earlier. You can use the jumper harness, the short one that comes with the unit. All the plugs will be in there and you're good to go. However, if your X5 was a little bit more spec'd up, you're going to have an amplifier to deal with. So let's go to the back and we'll talk about all the different setups with the amplifiers. All right, so the rear end. Now this is where things get really complicated and what you really need to understand properly before you start installing a stereo into your E53. Before we talk about the amplifiers, which is the main reason we come down here, I just want to show you what you're actually working with. So when you've got the screen version at the front, whether it's the 16:9 or the 4:3 screen, those screens just have 2 connectors, and those connectors plug straight into the either a BM53 or a BM54. There was actually an older version in the really old models, which we may have in this parts car here. Yes. So if you have a really early E53 or E39, you have this one here with that connector. But they all do the same thing. They are basically the brains of the screens. They are the vehicle's head unit. The head unit is in the boot, and this is where it gets complicated. So when you want to actually install a system that has this setup, you need one of these 6-meter cables, and that's what you're doing. You're patching the Android that's in the dashboard, which has all of its important bits up the front, into this little connector here, and that's how the Android gets its power signals, connects to the speakers, the amplifiers, everything goes through that connector there. Now, once you've identified that you've got that system, you know you're going to have to pay that extra money to get this harness. In David's car, we actually made a harness, and I gotta be honest, many regrets. Just buy these cables. They're $40 to $50 depending on where you get them from, and it saves a lot of work if you try and make it yourself. But once you know what's going on with that, you need to work out the amplifier setup. Now, the reason the amplifier setup is important, because if you have the basic hi-fi amp, which is this version here with 1 connector, it's actually quite an easy install from the Android. Once you connect that harness to that plug there, everything's gonna work. You're good to go, enjoy the music, don't even think about it anymore. But if you have a DSP system, because these are really, they're almost like a smart amplifier. Where the signals come into this, I think these have 4 channels coming in from memory and then 10 channels coming out. The DSP only has 2 channels coming in, and then it has, I think, 11 channels coming out, maybe 14, depending on how they do the sub. But it actually does a lot more of the processing, and you can control this box from the screen under the DSP menu. So you can set frequencies and really tune the system through this box, and that's why they have the extra connectors. Now, unfortunately, because this is like a smart box, it's looking for a signal from this unit and the whole iBus system to get it to work. In the early days, you couldn't run a DSP unless you kept the front unit actually in the car. So guys would install an aftermarket stereo and then hide this somewhere, either in the glove box, somewhere, so that you could still control the DSP and keep it functioning. With the later model Androids and the iBus connector, you can actually get an application that controls the DSP over the iBus, which is pretty cool. And that's what I was expecting to have to do with this if it wasn't a relic that's been swimming. Now, if you've bought an E53, E39, E46 that has a faulty amplifier like we're dealing with, it does mean you've got a lot more work to do, and that's another thing that I wanted to talk about here. All right, now I'm trying to piece this together so it makes sense to you guys, but if you're going to make the commitment to bypass the amplifier, let's focus on the hi-fi amp at the moment. So if you've got a hi-fi setup, it's actually not too bad, and you can get away with running the signal, well, the signals that come out of this connector, they'll go into that, and you've actually got, on the hi-fi cars, you've got 4 channels which go into the harness and then up to the factory amplifier. So you can use high-level input from this amplifier into your aftermarket one, and you're good to go. Obviously, with an aftermarket amplifier, you'll have high and low pass frequencies, and you can tweak it a little bit to suit what you need it to do, but you don't need to run RCA leads. You can use the factory high-level audio. I did that on my E53 on its first iteration of a stereo install, and it sounded absolutely fine. At the time, I was running factory speakers in the car, and when I switched up to RCAs, it made no difference. So the factory speakers couldn't pick up the quality difference between running an RCA setup versus using a high-level audio setup. So I'd recommend doing that if you've got this. Now, when you've wired the input into your aftermarket amplifier, wiring the aftermarket amplifier into the car does get a little bit more complicated. Now, even though I refer to this as a basic or dumb amplifier, it does still have crossovers built into it. So the 4 channels that go in, they get split into 10 channels. That's 5 left, 5 right. But where it gets broken down and why the crossovers are important, each of the speakers have parts of the sound taken out so they don't distort. So we get low frequencies into this one, mid frequencies into that one, and then your high frequencies in there. And then in the rear of the car, it's a similar setup, but it's not broken down as badly. Low frequencies, mid-range, and high frequencies. And all of that processing, I guess, of the sound is done in this amplifier. So 4 channels come in, 10 channels go out. And the way I bypassed that on my old setup was with these 4 crossover units. We have 2 for the front and 2 for the rear. And what we'll basically be having, we're having 4 channels coming out of the aftermarket amplifier and going into each crossover. And then it separates the front. We've got the woofer signal, the mid-range signal, and the tweeter signal, and we can wire all that into the wiring harness there, and it's not too bad. I had all the crossovers sitting in the back and it all worked pretty well, and I'm going to replicate that with this one. So that is how you can install, well, that is how you can bypass a factory hi-fi amp. With the DSP, it does get a little bit more complicated. Now, the way that the wiring harnesses are set up for these, they only have 2-channel input going into this. If you wanted to, you could essentially use just a 2-channel input into your aftermarket amplifier as a high-level input, and I reckon it would work absolutely fine. So what we'd have the Android sending the Android actually sends 4 channels, but only 2 channels come out of here. I'm just having a quick look at that connector. Yeah, if you look at the connectors there, you can see the Android has 8 wires on this section, where this one only has 4. So even that's going to use a left channel from the front and a right channel from the rear, which isn't ideal. Yeah, I think that's right. So what I would recommend doing, if you've got a DSP system and you're going to bypass the DSP, don't cheap out and get some RCA leads. That's what I'm actually going to do with this car. Hopefully I've got some RCAs lying around. And then we'll run the RCA leads, and that's what's going to feed my aftermarket amplifiers. And then once we've got the signal going to the amplifiers, I'm going to use the same thing. So I'm going to use these 4 crossovers from my old vehicle, feed them into the wiring harness here. And if you're interested in the wiring pinouts, just leave a comment below and I will link you to the pages where I work them out. I haven't actually done that yet. And that is going to run 10 audio channels into the doors and the front section, and that's going to get my high level, or my main mid-range audio all sorted. As for the sub, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to run that subwoofer. I did try one of the DSP subs in my old X5 and I was really unimpressed with it. I was hoping it might work a bit better with a proper amp. I was running it off an aftermarket amp and it just sounded terrible. So if you're going to make the commitment, and forgive me for stuttering a bit here because I'm trying to think ahead. This is a really complicated thing to talk about off the cuff. If you're going to make the commitment to bypass your amplifier, you're going to have 2 amplifiers to deal with and 2 lots of wiring to deal with. If you've got an E53, E46 or an E39 that just has the hi-fi amp, and this is what was in David's car, and I think what caused a bit of confusion because a lot of people do have the DSPs, but if you've got one of these, you can run the 4-channel of audio input that comes from the Android at the front of the car. It runs down through these extension cables and comes out of these little connectors here. They plug into your factory harness, and on a hi-fi car you'll actually have 8 wires in this section down here, not 4, and then those 8 wires run up to this amplifier, and you can use those as an input signal for your aftermarket amplifier. So you're essentially just cutting off the harness here, tapping in for the audio in. Even though it's a high level input, on my car it actually worked absolutely fine. I didn't have any issues with that setup. In fact, I actually upgraded to RCAs when I bypassed this, and I didn't really notice any difference running the standard factory speakers. So once you've got those 4 channels of audio coming into your aftermarket amplifier, the aftermarket amp is actually going to amplify those 4 channels, where we have 10 channels in these bloody complicated vehicles. The way I got around that, I actually bought these cheap aftermarket crossovers. I got them off Amazon. I can't remember what they cost, but they weren't that much money. And what that does, I've got 2 for the front doors and 2 for the rear. The front doors, because we have 3 audio channels in the front, we've got the woofer, the mid-range, the tweeter. That's what these send out. So we have an input, and then we have a woofer, mid-range, and a tweeter. And again, you can tap into those wires in this harness on this version of amplifier, and it's actually not too hard to wire up. Everything's there, it's just a matter of feeding in and feeding out. And then we have the rear channels here, 1 going in, 1 for the woofer and 1 for the tweeter, because the rear channels just have a woofer and a tweeter, or a mid-range. Could probably call it a mid-range. But that actually is all you need to do to replace the hi-fi amplifier. 4 channels into it, 4 channels coming out of the aftermarket amp, 4 channels going into the crossovers, and then 10 channels coming out of the crossovers. I hope I haven't lost everyone. And again, just ask me in the comments below if you've got any questions, because this is probably all getting quite advanced. Now, if you're going to replace the DSP system, the reason these get a little bit more complicated, they only have 2 channels of audio coming in, and when you're in a car, normally you want to be able to fade to the front, to the back, to the left and the right. So you really need 4 channels of audio going into your aftermarket amplifier. There is no way to do that through the factory high-level audio inputs if you've got a DSP car, because you literally only have 2 channels to play with. Now, it's not a problem when you've got the factory DSP, because this does all the signal processing. This will send it to the left or the right of the vehicle, or the front or the back. But when you're not using a smart DSP amp, you're going to be using a basic aftermarket one, you lose that functionality. So the only way to do it if you have a DSP amp is to run RCAs from the front to the back of the car. You could run extra wires from this harness, which is coming, and run a high level input, but I think if you go into that level, if you're replacing a DSP system, just get RCAs. It should work a bit better, especially if you're doing speaker upgrades. I'm not going to do speaker upgrades, but I have got RCAs, so I'm just going to use my RCA leads instead of tapping into these, because it's the better way to do it. So once we have all the audio signals coming from the front, oh, and I guess the other thing that I'm completely forgetting about, if you're going to run a subwoofer, which is what we've got here, there is no sub channel that comes out of the Android head unit. You do need to use RCAs and a low level RCA signal if you're going to run a sub channel. So yeah, that's another reason to run RCAs. And again, once you've got the 4 channels coming into the high level aftermarket amplifier, we'll have 4 channels coming in, 4 channels going out, and using these crossovers again to separate all the signals so that the appropriate signal goes to each of the speakers in the door. I hope that makes sense, I really do. Now, for the subs, I did actually, on my old E53, I bought a second-hand one of these off Gumtree, and I ran it off a small aftermarket amplifier. That small amp still output more than this does to the subwoofer, but I wasn't ecstatic with the audio I got out of it, and I feel like I should probably replace it. And I've got a couple of options, but they're a bit silly, but I want to see what you guys think about them. So the first option I've got is to use that amp, which is what I used in my old car before I decided to upgrade. I can use that to power those 2 dual voice coil subs. It gets a bit dodgy with the wiring, but it will essentially work. It doesn't work great, but it is an option. The other option is many months ago, there was a silly sale on eBay, and I accidentally bought a twin 12-inch subwoofer system. Yes, it was accidentally. But I was thinking about putting that in the car. I don't really know why I bought that. It was like one of those deals where it's too cheap not to buy it. It was legit less than what an amp kit would normally cost, like an amp wiring kit. Or do we go all out and either make a custom box in there to run like a 10-inch shallow sub, or even maybe a custom box in the floor? Let me know what you guys would like to see. I kind of I kind of want to go all out with it. I don't know why. When I always say all out, like I kind of want to do like a custom install with subs. Just because I've never done it. With my old X5, I ended up putting 2 shallow mount 10-inch Pioneers, and they would sit right tight in that gap, and they didn't really take up any boot space, running them on a 1000 watt amp, and actually had a decent amount of bass. I also ended up upgrading the 4-channel amp I was using to a Alpine R-Type. I think that was a 500 watt amp or 600 watt amp. And I also got rid of all the factory speakers and ran focal splits front and rear, changed it to just an 8-channel setup instead of a 10-channel. And that stereo sounded awesome, especially, actually, I sound deadened it as well. Yeah, I spent quite a lot of money on that old stereo. But yeah, let me know what you think you're gonna do. Let me know what you think I should do to replace these, if in case there's an option that I don't know about. But yeah, from memory, they don't sound like good. But I am gonna try and wire them up tonight off of this little amp. The last thing to do, I kind of want to power up the xtrons and just see what it's like, which we should be able to do. That's the connector that xtron supplied. Doesn't do anything. Had to pay extra for that one, but we need that one. But I should be able to just plug that into the harness in the boot and get it to power on. So let's give it a crack. In case you're wondering, I actually just had to go and do a work delivery, which is why this all got shut back up. Oh no. Don't want to lose those screws. Anyway, moving on, as I've just made a mess. So what we're going to do is, hopefully you guys can see this, is plug the, there you go, is the camera going to stay there? So we'll plug this end of this 6-meter extension cable into the harness, sorry, that end. So this is the factory harness in the boot. And if we're lucky, that should be all we need to power up the Android. Okay. And then we will plug this end in the Android. Since it was quite an expensive Android, let's hope it doesn't just fry it. It has plugged in, but it didn't feel very nice. Didn't feel very nice at all. Well, let's see if it powers up. Go and put the key in. Hey, it turned on. Amazing. So it is running Android 10. Let's see what the boot time's like. Actually, it might be better if we shadow it in there. Nope, still can't see it. So that's it. Still got the cover on, but seems relatively, when I say recover, the screen protector, but the screen is responding pretty well. All right, I'm finally logged in. Oh, it took nearly 10 minutes to get it logged into YouTube, but we're in and can see all my stuff. Let's just play a quick video and we'll see how long it takes to play. That was pretty quick. Like, honestly, Skid Factory, I did watch the whole thing. I don't know why it started there. Honest. But, yeah, cool. It's got enough power to play a video. So, it does have all the other features, and I will do a proper review on it once we got it installed. But I'm not going to actually film the installation. Hopefully this video will give you enough of an idea what you need to do to get them installed. But if you've got any questions about installing a stereo into an E53, E46 or an E39, let me know. My old X5, like I said earlier, I really went all out with the install and tried quite a few different setups trying to get it what I wanted. So yeah, I know a bit about them. We also did Dave's E39 as well. So we've done a few stereos now. Guys, sorry this video dragged on a lot. It was a bit of a difficult one to try and explain all the different options to install these stereos. I'm going to enjoy trying to edit this and hopefully we'll see if it makes sense. But if not, just let me know in the comments below. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. I'm going to get this edited, and once I've edited this video, I'm going to come back and install a stereo. That's the plan anyway. All right, guys, thank you for watching. We'll catch you on the next one. Peace.